He offered shelter from the storm to a forgotten soul. He never imagined her powerful daughter was watching, ready to redefine his entire world. Before we begin, drop your city in the comments, and hit subscribe if you believe the smallest act can change a life. It was a night that swallowed the city whole, a tempest of wind and rain that hammered against the windows of the roaring bus, each gust a physical shove against its steel frame. Inside, the usual late-night chatter was replaced by a tense silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic thrum of the engine and the relentless assault of the weather. David, a man in his late 30s, his uniform cap pulled low, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The glow of the dashboard lights reflected in his tired eyes that had seen too many lonely streets, too many forgotten faces. He was a city bus driver, a silent observer of 1,000 fleeting lives, carrying the weight of his routes and a heavier burden of his own. This was his last run of the night, the 37B, winding through the oldest, most neglected parts of the city, where streetlights flickered like dying embers and shadows stretched long and hungry. Most nights, by this hour, the bus was empty, a ghost lumbering through the dark. But tonight there was one more stop. He pulled up to the abandoned shelter on Elm Street, a rusted metal shell barely offering protection from the elements. The wipers struggled against the deluge, revealing a small, hunched figure huddled on the bench, utterly exposed. An elderly woman, her thin coat plastered to her frame, a small, worn bag clutched tightly to her chest. She looked like a leaf caught in the storm, fragile, lost. Eleanor. Her white hair, once neatly coiffed, was now a wild halo of damp tendrils around a face etched with the lines of age and something far deeper: confusion, fear, a profound sense of disorientation. David frowned, a knot tightening in his gut. This wasn't just someone waiting for a bus. This was someone lost. He hesitated for only a second, the rules of the transit authority echoing in his mind: keep to schedule, no unscheduled stops, no unauthorized passengers. But a different rule, one etched deeper than any company policy, resonated in his heart. It was the rule his mama had taught him, a whisper from his past: you always help those who need it, son. Even when it ain't convenient. He killed the engine, the sudden silence inside the bus almost deafening against the storm's roar. He stood, his broad frame filling the narrow aisle, and walked to the door. He pushed it open, the gust of wind and rain immediately tearing at his uniform. "Ma'am?" he called, his voice deep, gentle, carrying above the wind's howl. "You all right out here? Last bus of the night." Eleanor flinched, startled, her eyes wide and unfocused. She looked up at him, a flicker of fear, then a dawning bewilderment. The station?" she mumbled, her voice frail, barely audible. "I think I missed my stop. I don't know where I am." David's heart ached. Her confusion was palpable, a chilling aura of vulnerability. "It's all right, ma'am," he said, extending a steady hand. "Come on. Get in. It's warm in here. We'll figure it out." She hesitated, her eyes darting between his outstretched hand and the empty bus, suspicion warring with desperation. But the cold, the sheer, relentless cold, seemed to make the decision for her. Slowly, painfully she reached out, her trembling fingers grasping his. David gently helped her to her feet, supporting her frail weight. He carefully guided her up the steps, settling her into the seat directly behind the driver's, the one with the least bumps. He even found a spare, clean rag from his emergency kit and gently wiped the rain from her face, his touch surprisingly tender. Eleanor shivered, drawing the worn bag tighter, but a subtle warmth began to spread through her, a faint sense of safety. She looked at him, her eyes, though still confused, now holding a flicker of bewildered gratitude. He didn't know it, but this simple act of sheltering a lost elderly woman wasn't just kindness. It was a lifeline. And for Sarah, her powerful daughter, who was miles away, her world about to be turned upside down, it was a moment that would change everything. David, 38 years old, and the city in all its relentless anonymity, had taught him to become a master of quiet observation. He drove the routes, day in and day out, watching the ebb and flow of lives from behind his windshield, present yet unseen, a silent guardian of the city's veins. His existence was a constant, grinding effort to stay afloat, a delicate balance of paying the bills and trying to keep his own dreams from fading into the exhaust fumes of his daily grind. His small, neat apartment, filled with the faint scent of cinnamon from the candles he lit for his late mother, was his sanctuary from the harsh realities of the world outside. His days were a blur of early mornings and late nights, navigating the crowded streets, the endless stops, the fleeting faces he'd never truly remember. Every fare, every penny was accounted for, a testament to his quiet, relentless fight for survival that he carried the echoes of a past where help was scarce and hardship was a constant companion. His mama, a woman who had worked her fingers to the bone as a cleaner, had instilled in him a quiet, unbreakable resilience. "Son," she used to say, her voice soft as worn fabric, her hands, though calloused, always gentle, "the world ain't always kind. But that don't mean you can't be. You always help those who need it. That's your honor, David. That's your strength." It was a lesson David had internalized, a silent creed that guided his actions, a moral compass that pointed true north even when the city's cynicism tried to drag him down. He had seen firsthand what it meant to be unseen, unheard, dismissed. He had known the biting cold of winter nights, the gnawing hunger of an empty stomach, the silent shame of reaching out for help only to find empty hands. He knew what it felt like to be Eleanor, vulnerable and lost. That empathy was not a weakness, but the core of his immense strength, a wellspring of compassion that never ran dry, no matter how much life took from him. He didn't know Sarah, Eleanor's daughter. Didn't need to. Eleanor's eyes, those wide, lost blue eyes, had told him enough. The kind of confusion that age brought, coupled with a deeper, unsettling vulnerability that spoke of a life suddenly unmoored. The kind of fear that crept into the voice of someone who had nothing left to protect themselves with. It was a look he knew all too well from a different time, a different life, from a reflection that once haunted his own gaze. And across the city, in the sterile high-stakes world of political power, Sarah, a woman consumed by ambition and responsibility, was about to receive a call that would shatter her carefully constructed reality. She wouldn't know it, but her mother's encounter with the kind bus driver would become the quiet catalyst. It was about to set a chain of events in motion that would change both their lives forever, tying them together in a destiny neither could have foreseen. The storm outside continued its relentless beat, but for David, a single, unexpected warmth had just begun to thaw the ice around his heart, a crack in the carefully constructed fortress of his solitude. Hours later, the storm had lessened to a persistent drizzle, but the city still felt heavy, suffocated by the lingering damp. David, his shift finally over, pulled his bus into the depot, the roar of the engine dying with a sigh. He had made sure Eleanor was comfortable, wrapped in a blanket he found in the emergency kit, sipping hot tea he'd managed to get from a kindly late-night gas station attendant. Her confusion had remained, a flickering candle in her eyes, but the terror had receded, replaced by a fragile peace. He had dropped her off at a local community center known for its overnight shelter, gently explaining her situation to the staff, ensuring she was safe. He hadn't asked for a name beyond Eleanor, hadn't pressed for details. His job was to help, not to interrogate. He left her with a final, reassuring smile and headed home, the quiet satisfaction of a good deed a small warmth against the chill of his own empty apartment. He assumed she was just another lost soul, now safe, her story concluded for him. He couldn't have been more wrong. Miles away, in a world far removed from the cold, quiet streets of David's route, a different kind of storm was just beginning. Sarah, the state governor, a woman whose life was a meticulously choreographed dance of public appearances, policy debates and relentless schedules, felt a cold dread seize her gut. Her sprawling, elegant home, usually a haven of quiet luxury, now echoed with the frantic whispers of her security detail. Eleanor, her mother, had been missing for hours. Eleanor, who had been struggling with early-stage dementia, a truth Sarah kept fiercely guarded from the public eye, a vulnerability she couldn't afford to expose. Sarah, always in control, felt a chilling panic creep into her veins. Her mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her, who was now her most profound, secret responsibility, was out there, alone, in this unforgiving night. The governor's mansion hummed with controlled chaos. A dedicated team, usually focused on state security, was now mobilized for one purpose: finding Eleanor Vance. Any leads? Sarah demanded, her voice sharp, betraying the raw fear gnawing at her. Her chief of staff, a grim-faced man named Reynolds, shook his head. Last seen leaving her apartment complex around 8 p.m., went for a walk. Security footage shows her getting disoriented, then, nothing. We've got units canvassing every route, checking every shelter. Sarah closed her eyes, picturing her mother's fragile frame, her often confused gaze. The weight of her public persona, the need to appear strong, decisive, crushed down on her private agony. She was the governor, capable of moving mountains, yet she couldn't find her own mother. The helplessness was a bitter taste. Meanwhile, back at the bus depot, Marcus Thorne sat in his idling Bentley, which had followed David's bus for the final leg of its journey. His sharp, gray eyes, usually focused on market trends and investment portfolios, were fixed on the unassuming figure of David as he cleaned his bus. Marcus had spent the last few hours on his own relentless search, not for a lost mother, but for a hidden act of compassion. He had dispatched his own team, tapping into his vast private network, not just to trace Eleanor's movements, but to identify the driver who had dared to stop to care. His assistant, Nora, had delivered the grainy surveillance footage from a street camera near the bus stop where Eleanor was picked up. The image was fleeting, blurry, but clear enough to show David, a dark silhouette, reaching out a hand, helping Eleanor onto his bus. Marcus had watched that clip repeatedly. His eyes, so accustomed to seeing greed and self-interest, saw something different in David's posture, in the gentle way he guided the old woman. It was a stark contrast to the callous efficiency of the world Marcus inhabited, and he admitted to himself with a jolt, the very way he had often conducted his own life. He didn't believe in sentiment, but he recognized a truth when he saw it. This man, David, had acted purely out of humanity, with no expectation of reward. Marcus, the master of debts and obligations, knew he had just witnessed something invaluable. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over a contact. "Reynolds," he muttered, recognizing the number on his screen. Sarah's chief of staff. Marcus had known Sarah Vance for years, a political force, ambitious and driven. He knew of Eleanor's quiet struggle, a closely guarded secret of the powerful governor. This connection, this act of kindness, was about to intersect two vastly different worlds in a way neither David nor Sarah could possibly foresee. The pieces were falling into place, a powerful convergence set in motion by a bus driver's simple, profound act of caring. The quiet satisfaction David felt from helping Eleanor was short-lived, replaced by the gnawing anxiety that often accompanied any deviation from protocol. His supervisor, a stern by-the-book man named Mr. Henderson, had already left a terse message on his work phone. "Report to my office first thing, David. Regarding an unscheduled stop on your last route." David's gut clenched. He knew the rules. He knew the strict zero-tolerance policy for anything that disrupted the rigid schedule or bypassed procedure. In a system built on efficiency, kindness was often seen as a liability, a weakness that could lead to reprimand or worse, suspension. He barely slept, the image of Eleanor's lost eyes battling with the cold, official words of Henderson. He was a good employee, dedicated, reliable. But he was also a black man in a position where any misstep could be amplified, scrutinized, judged. His livelihood, balanced so precariously on the edge of his next paycheck, felt suddenly vulnerable. The next morning, the air in Henderson's office was thick with implied accusation. Henderson sat behind his desk, a stack of disciplinary forms beside him, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. "So, David," he began, his voice flat, devoid of warmth, "care to explain why your GPS logs show a 5-minute unscheduled stop on the 37B last night, precisely at 11:47 p.m., in a non-designated area?" David kept his voice steady, his resolve firm. "There was an elderly lady, sir. Lost. Confused. Out in the storm. I couldn't just leave her." Henderson leaned back, a thin, dismissive smile touching his lips. "And your report, Mr. Wilson, states you transported her to a community shelter, further deviating from your route. That's a direct violation. Our protocol for a stranded passenger is to call dispatch, not to turn a public bus into a private taxi service." David felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. "Dispatch would have taken an hour, sir." She was shaking. Scared. She could have caught pneumonia. "Your personal feelings aren't part of company policy, David," Henderson snapped, his voice rising, a thinly veiled threat. "This is a serious breach. I'm recommending a 1-week unpaid suspension, effective immediately. And any further infractions, well, you know how it goes." The words landed like a physical blow. A week unpaid. That meant missed rent, stretched groceries, the fragile balance of his life teetering closer to the edge. He stared at Henderson, the injustice of it all a bitter taste in his mouth. He had done the right thing, the human thing, and now he was being punished for it. He felt the cold sting of a world that valued rules over humanity, profit over compassion. Miles away, in her austere wood-paneled office, Governor Sarah Vance had finally received the news that simultaneously shattered her and brought a wave of immense relief. Her mother, Eleanor, had been found. She was safe, recovering at the downtown community shelter. The relief was overwhelming, almost paralyzing. But it was quickly followed by a searing guilt, a cold awareness of her own failure to protect the one person who mattered most. "Who found her?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed, ragged with emotion, her hands trembling as she clutched the phone. Her chief of staff, Reynolds, sounded weary but relieved. A bus driver, Governor. On the 37B route. He picked her up out of the storm, stayed with her, got her to the shelter. By all accounts, he went above and beyond. Sarah closed her eyes, picturing the scenario. Her mother, lost and vulnerable, a storm raging and a complete stranger stepping in. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, efficient search her own office had mounted. A bus driver? She murmured, the words foreign in her mouth, accustomed as she was to the names of senators and COs. Give me his name. And everything about him. I want to meet him. Immediately. Reynolds, ever the pragmatist, hesitated. Governor, with all due respect, your mother's disappearance has been a highly sensitive matter. A public meeting with a transit employee could raise questions about. Sarah cut him off, her voice suddenly sharp, imbued with the full force of her authority. My mother was lost, Reynolds. A man, a stranger, did what we couldn't. He saw a human being in distress and acted. That's not a liability, that's the kind of decency this city, this state, needs to see. Get him here. And find out if he faced any repercussions for his actions. If he did, I want them reversed. Now. The line went silent, then Reynolds simply said, Understood, Governor. I'll make the arrangements. Sarah hung up, her gaze falling on a framed photograph on her desk. A younger Eleanor, vibrant, smiling, holding Sarah's hand. A wave of profound gratitude, mixed with a deep, unsettling self-reflection, washed over her. The universe, in its intricate way, had sent an unlikely hero to save her mother, reminding her that true power sometimes resided not in titles or wealth, but in the simple, selfless act of a decent human being. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne in his silent war room had already confirmed the details. His private intelligence network had cross-referenced Eleanor Vance's movements with transit records, piecing together the story of the bus driver's selfless detour. He'd even acquired discrete footage from the bus depot, showing David's tired, dignified face as he walked away, unaware of the ripple effect his kindness had set in motion. Marcus, a master strategist, saw it all unfold. The raw human connection, the institutional indifference, the governor's desperate search, and now, her burgeoning gratitude towards this unassuming driver. He knew Sarah Vance. He knew her political mind, her drive, her carefully cultivated image. This incident, handled correctly, could be a powerful narrative for her. Handled poorly, it could expose uncomfortable truths. He also knew that David, the bus driver, represented a rare commodity in a world increasingly devoid of genuine compassion. Marcus, a man who believed in strategic investments, saw an opportunity, not just for a public relations coup but for something more profound. He saw a chance to invest in a different kind of value, a human value that had touched his own hardened heart through the kindness shown to Eleanor. He picked up his phone, dialing a number he hadn't called in years, a number that connected him directly to the governor's chief of staff. The pieces were falling into place, not by accident, but by the quiet, deliberate actions of an unseen hand. The air in Mr. Henderson's office was already heavy with the weight of David's impending suspension when the door swung open, not with a knock, but with a quiet, undeniable authority. Governor Sarah Vance stood there, flanked by Reynolds, her chief of staff, and another stern-faced aide. Her presence filled the small, sterile room, instantly silencing Henderson, who had started to stammer, rising awkwardly from his desk. Sarah's eyes, usually sharp and focused on legislative charts, were fixed on David, holding a gaze that was both intensely scrutinizing and profoundly grateful. Mr. Wilson, she said, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the tension. I understand you were on the 37B last night. David, who had resigned himself to the unfair suspension, felt a tremor of confusion and a flicker of bewildered hope. He nodded slowly, still standing. Yes, Governor. Sarah turned her gaze to Henderson, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mr. Henderson, I've been informed of your decision regarding Mr. Wilson's breach of protocol. I find it deeply misguided. Henderson's face blanched. Governor, with all due respect, rules are rules. We can't have drivers deviating from. Sarah cut him off, her voice unwavering, laced with steel that allowed no argument. My mother, Eleanor Vance, was found last night. Lost, disoriented, and exposed to a severe storm. She was picked up by Mr. Wilson who, defying your rules, chose to act as a human being first. He not only brought her to safety, but personally ensured she was settled at a shelter, going above and beyond the call of duty. While your dispatch system was still processing a missing person report, Mr. Wilson was saving a life. The words landed like a gavel, silencing all protest. Henderson shrank back, his disciplinary form suddenly looking flimsy and irrelevant. Sarah turned back to David, her expression softening, her eyes holding a deep, sincere gratitude that made his chest swell. "Mr. Wilson, on behalf of my family, and indeed, on behalf of every citizen who believes in basic human decency, thank you. You exemplify the very best of what public service should be." She extended her hand, a gesture of profound respect. David, still reeling, took it firmly. "I just did what was right, Governor," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Anyone would have." Sarah's smile was knowing. "No, Mr. Wilson. Not everyone would have. And that's precisely why your actions matter so much." She then turned back to Henderson, her gaze piercing. "Mr. Henderson, I expect Mr. Wilson's suspension to be rescinded immediately. Furthermore, I will be working with the Transit Authority to review and revise protocols regarding vulnerable passengers, ensuring that acts of compassion are not penalized but championed. Mr. Wilson will be instrumental in this process." Henderson, defeated, could only nod, muttering, "Understood, Governor." The news spread like wildfire. A local news crew, discreetly tipped off by Marcus Thorne's network, was waiting outside the depot. By noon, David's story was dominating every local news channel. The quiet bus driver who saved the governor's mother. The raw injustice of his near suspension juxtaposed with his profound kindness sparked public outrage and a wave of support. The Transit Authority, under immense public and political pressure, not only rescinded his suspension but issued a public apology, announcing a new David Wilson Compassion Award for employees going above and beyond. David was overwhelmed, his phone ringing off the hook, his face, usually a quiet presence, now splashed across every screen. His life, in a single, unexpected moment, had been completely upended. It was a life-changing surprise, a testament to a truth he had always lived by, now loudly proclaimed for the entire city to witness. The whirlwind of attention eventually subsided, but David's life was irrevocably changed. He was no longer just a bus driver, he was a symbol. He worked closely with Governor Vance, his quiet, practical wisdom invaluable in reshaping transit protocols to better serve the city's most vulnerable. His voice, once unheard beyond the confines of his bus, now resonated in boardrooms, advocating for empathy and dignity in public services. He helped establish training programs for drivers, rooted in the very compassion he had shown Eleanor, ensuring that no lost soul would ever again be left out in the cold. Eleanor, safely home and under specialized care, never fully regained her memory of that night, but she often spoke of the kind driver, a gentle presence that had brought her comfort in her confusion. Sarah, the governor, visited David frequently, their relationship evolving beyond a professional obligation to one of deep, mutual respect. She saw in David the embodiment of the values she aspired to for her state, a living reminder that true leadership was about more than policies and power, it was about heart. And then there was Marcus Thorne. He watched it all unfold, a quiet architect behind the scenes. His initial calculations, driven by a cold, strategic mind, had given way to something far more profound. He had seen the raw, unvarnished humanity in David, a stark contrast to the sterile, transactional world he had inhabited for so long. He saw how David's simple act had not only saved Eleanor but had sparked a transformation in Sarah, a reawakening of her own empathy. Marcus, a man who had built empires on data, realized he had overlooked the most valuable metric of all, human connection. He quietly funded the new compassion initiatives within the Transit Authority and became an anonymous, significant donor to the community shelter where Eleanor had found temporary refuge, a silent acknowledgement of the debt he truly owed. He even, cautiously, began to spend more time with Eleanor, driven by a quiet reflection on his own disconnected past. He learned from David's example, understanding that true legacy wasn't just in wealth, but in the unseen acts of kindness that ripple through a community. Sometimes the smallest act of love rewrites someone's whole story. David, the quiet bus driver, proved that. He didn't seek fame or fortune, but he raised his hand when no one else would. He extended warmth when the world offered only cold, and he stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to stay silent, to just follow the rules. In a world that often overlooks the quiet heroes, the unsung champions of everyday decency, David reminded us all what it looks like to slow down and simply care. His legacy wasn't built on grand speeches or political rallies. It was built on the quiet, profound truth that true leadership often begins with a single, selfless act of humanity on a deserted bus route, a hand offered to a forgotten soul, proving that the most powerful changes in the world are often orchestrated not